native plants and pollinators and how they reduce harmful chemicals and pesticides within our landscape. Now, here's the beauty of our native plants and pollinator component. They've already been here. They don't need any chemicals to help them survive. However, the artificial lawns and mulched landscapes that are very common within a lot of urbanized areas, they do generally use large amounts of artificial fertilizers and synthetic chemical pesticides in order to maintain the look. And that component is what has resulted in a lot of ecological destruction that has occurred within many landscapes across our United States. You know, suburban lawns and bark mulch landscapes, it's been found in studies that they receive more pesticides per application, which according to one particular study is 3.2 to 9.8 pounds of material than, let's say, even an agricultural component, which has been studied at about 2.7 pounds. And then compared to a native landscape, which has 0 pounds. So going from a 9.8 pound application to a 0 pound application is definitely gonna help out whoever is involved or surrounded around that location that is getting these artificial chemicals put into it. And let me just tell you a quick story just about how this is a story from the indigenous community that utilize many of the native plants for cultural uses. In one particular community up north in California, some friends of our tribe, their folks were actually developing lesions and harmful diseases related to their use of their native plants. What? But you just told me that native plants don't get any herbicide on them. Well, check it out. These native plants were right next to an agricultural farm. When the spray was put on the agricultural plants, the wind brought them over to the native sides. And then when the indigenous community started utilizing those native plants by making baskets, which is what this particular activity was, when you make baskets, you actually have to put the leaf into your mouth in order to tighten. And so this community was developing lesions and cancer in their mouths because of their exposure to these artificial chemicals of the next door land area. And these results of utilizing these chemical inhibitors for, pesticides, for pests, for the insects, for the pollinators pretty much, as well as for invasive plants or weeds, what we call them. These actually will result in detriment to not only the wildlife, but also to the human. And just a quick story about wildlife as well that had a detrimental effect. And this was actually an experience that I experienced being a part of a endangered species protection group. In some of my biological work here in the LA area, I'm able to participate in nesting support for one of our endangered tern species called the California least tern. And in one particular year, this actually has happened in multiple years, but in one particular year, it was very apparent about why we were finding these negative components happening on the nesting site. And here's just a quick story of how we discovered this. In our local harbors and bays, there's a lot of applications in people's lawns, and we have golf courses, and we have all these associated areas that will utilize these harmful chemicals on their landscape. And when we have rains, these harmful chemicals will be washed into our waterways, and eventually into the ocean. During this one particular year, so many nitrates were flushed into our ocean that we had a huge algal bloom. And this algal bloom, we call it the red tide or other components of that. A lot of people like it actually here in Southern California because it creates this illuminescence when you go through it. So actually when you're surfing in it or when you're swimming in this water that has this algal bloom going on, it's not good to drink, but people get, distracted by the illuminescence that happens because when you're swimming and it's at night, it'll glow green. But that's a side story. But what it does is it also allows for the algae and these blue-green algae to just proliferate. And what this blue-green algae does in our harbors is they take away all the oxygen. So, going back to our bird story, our birds, the California least tern, are dependent upon a small little fish, the anchovy. And this little fish lives in our harbors and was the main food source that our California least tern needed to get. But during this one particular year, because of the algal blooms, all the fish ended up dying. We actually had large amounts of anchovies die all throughout our area. So then on our nesting sites, we were noticing, oh my goodness, there's no anchovies coming in. What we're finding are these pipefish. And these are long tubular fish that actually are found on the bottom of the ocean. So not only do our birds have to search out in other areas for food for their babies, they have to actually get different types of food and go deeper into the water to be able to catch fish to feed their babies. Well, now, this fish was a long tubular fish, kind of like my finger. And when a baby would eat that tubular fish, we found many of the young chicks dead because of suffocation from the fish not being able to go down into their gullet and into their belly because it wasn't the right type of fish. But that's all the parents could get because we had all these harmful chemicals going into our system, ruining this ecological balance that has been there for millions of years. And thus now the result is a whole generation of an endangered species ended up dying off. And in that year, I think we had very minimal amount of successful nests because of the food resource that was destroyed during that one time. It was seasonal. And that result, because of the need for use of these harmful chemicals on our grass, our lawns, our bark mulched areas, on these areas that have been decided upon to landscape it in this certain way, that all those chemicals, they have to go somewhere. They don't just stay there. And so when they get flushed off and they get moved around on our landscape, they eventually affect other cycles and other systems. So by reducing the harmful chemicals in our landscape and choosing native plants for landscaping, not only benefits the local biodiversity, but also creates a healthier landscape for the community, including yourself and your family.